The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked into my mailbox like a venomous snake coiled in wait. It was a pristine white envelope, the kind that screamed official business, stamped with the silver crest of the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association, a stylized pine tree that looked more like a corporate logo than anything resembling nature. I didn't need to open it to know it was trouble. The HOA didn't send mail unless they were slapping you with a fine, nagging about some tri-VYL rule, or unveiling their latest scheme to squeeze more money out of us. My gut churned as I tore it open, the crisp paper slicing into my thumb with a sting that felt oddly prophetic. Effective immediately, the letter read in bold, officious font. Your monthly HOA dues will increase by 600 fan-tram to fund critical infrastructure upgrades and community enhancements. Failure to comply will result in immediate penalties, liens on your property, and potential legal action. I blinked, reread it, then laughed at a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the empty porch of my modest two-story home. 600%? That wasn't an increase, it was a heist. My current dues were due law $150 a month. Now they want to do law $900? For a neighborhood where the streets were cracked, the clubhouse was a moldy relic, and the community enhancements amounted to a few wilted flower beds. I crumpled the letter in my fist and stormed inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. My wife, Sarah, poked her head out of the kitchen, a wooden spoon in hand and a frown creasing her brow. "What's wrong, Ethan?" she asked, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "They've lost their damn minds," I said, tossing the crumpled paper onto the counter. "The HOA's jacking up dues by 600%. 600, Sarah? That's more than our car payment." She smoothed out the letter, her hazel eyes scanning the text. Her lips pressed into a thin line, a telltale sign she was as furious as I was. "This is insane," she muttered. "What infrastructure upgrades? The last time they fixed anything was when that storm took out the stop sign 3 years ago, and, even then, they billed us extra for it." "Exactly," I said, pacing the linoleum floor. "This isn't about upgrades. It's a cash grab, and I'm not paying it without a fight." Sarah arched an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "You gonna take on Margaret Voss?" I stopped pacing. Margaret Voss, the HOA president, a woman whose name alone could make grown men flinch. She was a wiry, sharp-featured woman in her late 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that could bore holes through concrete. She ruled Pinewood Estates like a dictator, her reign marked by petty fines, draconian rules, and an uncanny ability to turn neighbors against each other. If you dared cross her, you'd find yourself buried under violation notices your mailbox painted the wrong shade of beige, your grass half an inch too long, your dog barking 1 decibel too loud. She was the kind of person who thrived on control, and she'd been lording over us for nearly a decade. "Yeah," I said, meeting Sarah's gaze. "I'm taking her on. She doesn't get to bleed us dry without a damn good explanation." The next morning, I drove to the HOA office, a squat, beige building at the edge of the cul-de-sac that looked more like a forgotten storage unit than a seat of power. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of cheap perfume and burnt coffee. Margaret sat behind a chipped wooden desk, her fingers clacking on a keyboard, her lips pursed in that perpetual smirk she wore like a badge of honor. She didn't look up as I entered, even though the bell above the door jingled loudly enough to wake the dead. "Margaret," I said, dropping the letter onto her desk with a thud. "What the hell is this?" She finally glanced up, her gray eyes narrowing as if I were a bug she just noticed on her windshield. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I assume you're here about the dues adjustment?" "Adjustment?" I snorted. "You call a 600% hike an adjustment? That's extortion, and you know it." She folded her hands atop the desk, her manicured nails gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "It's not extortion, Ethan. It's necessity. The board has approved a series of VY-TAL Project Snoopa VY-ing for the streets. A complete overhaul of the clubhouse, security cameras at every entrance. These things don't pay for themselves." I laughed again, louder this time. "Pa VY-ing? The streets have been crumbling for years, and you've done nothing. The clubhouse? It's a rat-infested dump I wouldn't set foot in. And security cameras? For what? To catch misses. Delaney's cat sneaking into my yard. Her smirk widened, but her eyes hardened. If you don't like the decisions, you're free to sell your house and leave Pinewood Estates. No one's forcing you to stay. That hit me like a punch to the gut. Leave? I'd lived here for 12 years, raised my daughter, Mia, in this house, built a life with Sarah here. This was my home, and I'd be damned if Margaret Voss bullied me out of it over her latest power trip. You can't just raise dues like that overnight, I said, leaning forward. There are rules, even for you. Oh, we followed the rules, she replied, her tone smug. The board voted unanimously. It's all perfectly legal. The board, I muttered, shaking my head. The board was a joke. Margaret and her hand-picked cronies. Tom Ridley, a retired accountant who nodded at her every word. Linda Hayes, a nosy busybody who lived for gossip. And Victor Pena, a slick real estate agent who always seemed to profit when someone in the neighborhood sold their home cheap. They weren't a board. They were a cabal. This isn't over, I said, turning to leave. I'm sure it's not, she called after me, her voice laced with mockery. I stepped outside into the humid morning air, my blood boiling. Margaret thought she could steamroll us, but she'd underestimated me. If she wanted a war, I'd give her one, and I'd make damn sure she regretted starting it. Back home, I didn't waste time. I fired my laptop and started digging. As a homeowner, I had a right to the HOA's financial records, though getting them was like pulling teeth. After an hour of navigating the convoluted HOA website and firing off a terse email to Margaret's assistant, I got my hands on the last 5 years of budget reports. They were mess pages of dense numbers, vague line items, and cryptic abbreviations. But I wasn't an accountant for nothing. Before Mia was born, I'd worked as a forensic auditor, sniffing out fraud for small businesses. If there was dirt here, I'd find it. Sarah joined me at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand. Find anything yet? She asked, peering over my shoulder. Not yet, I said, scrolling through a spreadsheet. But look at this: miscellaneous administrative costs, Dula $12,000 last year. No breakdown, no explanation. That's a red flag. She frowned. Could be anything. Office supplies, coffee, her salary. Maybe, I said, but it's consistent. Dula $10,000 to Dula $15,000 every year, no details. And here, I pointed to another line. Payments to Voss Consulting Group, over Dula $50,000 in the past 2 years. Voss. Sarah's eyes widened. As in Margaret Voss? Could be a coincidence, I said, though I didn't believe it. I need more. I spent the next few hours cross-referencing names and companies, my old auditing instincts kicking in. Voss Consulting Group was registered to a PO box downtown, but the trail went cold there until I found a buried footnote in the 2022 report mentioning a subcontractor tied to the same address. Pinnacle Property Solutions. A quick Google search revealed Pinnacle was owned by Daniel Voss, Margaret's younger brother, a sleazy contractor who'd been sued twice for shoddy work. The pieces clicked into place. She wasn't just skimming dues, she was funneling them to her family. Holy shit, I muttered, leaning back in my chair. She's been robbing us blind. Sarah stared at the screen, her jaw tight. How much? Hard to say, without a full audit, but tens of thousands, easy. Maybe more. What are you going to do? I grinned, a plan forming. I'm going to bury her with this. But first, I need leverage. I called an old college buddy, Jake, who now worked in the city's utilities department. After some small talk, I got to the point. Can you pull records on the HOA office's power account? Jake chuckled. What are you up to, Ethan? Just need a favor. I think they're cooking the books, and I want to hit them where it hurts. He promised to dig and called back an hour later. You're in luck. The office is on a separate commercial grid tied to the HOA's account, not the residential one. If there's a financial dispute, like unpaid bills or suspected fraud, I can flag it for re-VYEW. That'd cut their power until it's resolved. How long would that take? I asked. Weeks, maybe months. They'd be dead in the water. Perfect, I said. Flag it. I'll send you the EVY Denke. That night, I submitted a formal complaint to the utility company, attaching screenshots of the suspicious payments. By morning, the trap was set. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was Jake. "It's done," he said. "Power's off at the HOA office as of 6 a.m. They're scrambling." I grinned, pulling on a jacket. "Thanks, man. I owe you." I drove past the office on my way to grab coffee, slow to take in the scene. The building was dark, its windows lifeless. Margaret stood outside, her arms crossed, barking in her phone while Tom and Linda hovered nearby, looking lost. A small crowd of neighbors had already gathered, drawn by the commotion. I parked across the street, sipping my coffee and watching the chaos unfold. Margaret's voice carried over the murmurs. "This is unacceptable. Get someone out here now." But the utility company wasn't budging, not with a fraud investigation pending. A woman I vaguely recognized, Ellen Carter, a quiet widow who lived 3 houses down, approached me. "Ethan, do you know what's going on?" I shrugged, playing dumb. "Looks like the power's out. Maybe they didn't pay the bill." Her brow furrowed. "With that dues increase? How could they not?" The question hung in the air, and I saw my opening. "Funny you mentioned that," I said, pulling my laptop from the car. "I found something in the financials last night. Want to see?" Ellen nodded, and soon a dozen neighbors crowded around as I opened the files. Gasps rippled through the group as I walked them through the EVY payments to Voss Consulting, the inflated admin costs, the connection to Daniel Voss. "She's been stealing from us," I said. "That 600 fan tram increase? It's not for upgrades. It's to cover her tracks." The mood shifted from confusion to fury. "That's our money," shouted Mike Torres, a burly mechanic who'd once gotten a DULA 500 fine for parking his work truck in his own driveway. "She can't get away with this." "She won't," I said, handing out printed copies of the records. "Spread the word." By noon, the crowd had doubled. People clutched the documents, their voices rising in outrage. Margaret must have sensed the tide turning because she stormed over, her face a mask of barely contained rage. "Harper," she snapped, "are you behind this?" I met her glare with a calm smile. "Behind what? The power outage? No idea, but I did find these." I handed her a stack of printouts, her own damning paper trail. She snatched them, her eyes darting over the pages. For a split second, fear flickered across her face before she masked it with indignation. "This is nonsense," she hissed. "You're twisting the facts." "Am I?" I said. "Explain the DULA 50,000 to your brother's company. Explain the missing reserve funds." "We're not stupid, Margaret." The crowd pressed closer, their anger palpable. She took a step back, clutching the papers like a shield. "This is slander," she stammered. "I'll sue you for this." "Go ahead," I said. "But you might want to save your money for a lawyer. You're going to need one." The next few hours were a blur of momentum. Mike, who'd worked construction for 20 years, cited the HOA bylaw section 14.3 allowed an emergency vote to remove the board with a 2/3 majority if misconduct was proven. Ellen pulled out a petition form, and signatures piled up fast. By dusk, we had enough to call the vote. Margaret tried to rally her loyalists, insisting the records were misinterpreted and the dues increase was essential. But her words fell flat. Too many had seen the truth due, many had felt her boot on their necks for years. That evening, we gathered in the park near the powerless HOA office. Folding tables held ballots, and a line of residents stretched across the grass. Margaret and her cronies stood off to the side, their faces pale in the fading light. The vote was quick, the tally overwhelming. 92 fan tram to oust the board. A cheer erupted as the results were announced. Margaret didn't wait for the dust to settle. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement, her empire in ruins. But this was just the beginning. Over the next weeks, we uncovered more. Fake invoices, a secret loan, even a VY Denke, she'd manipulated property sales to benefit Victor Pena. An attorney, brought in by Mike, filed a lawsuit for fraud and embezzlement. The audit revealed she'd siphoned overdue lot $200,000. Her assets were frozen, her house seized, and criminal charges loomed. As for Pinewood Estates, We didn't just survive, you thrived. Without the HOA's iron grip, neighbors banded together, fixing what mattered, sharing resources, and reclaiming our freedom. Margaret's house was auctioned to a nonprofit, becoming a home for a veteran's familia final twist of the knife. One night, I sat on my porch, floodlights blazing just because I could, and watched the neighborhood hum with life. We'd beaten her not with fists, but with truth, and that VY Tory tasted sweeter than anything she'd ever known. This is the first 2,500 words. I can continue expanding it with subplots, e.g., a rival faction loyal to Margaret, a personal stakes twist involve VY in Ethan's family, or a deeper dive into the community's transformation. To reach 15,00025,000 words. Let me know if you'd like me to proceed. The night of the vote was a turning point, but it wasn't the end. Margaret Voss might have slunk away into the shadows, her tail between her legs, but I knew her type cornered animals don't just roll over. They bite harder. As the crowd dispersed from the park, their cheers fading into the cool evening air, I lingered by my car, watching the darkened HOA office. The power was still out, a silent testament to the chaos I'd unleashed. Sarah joined me, her arms crossed against the chill. "You think she'll let this go?" she asked, her voice low. "Not a chance," I said. "She's down, not out. We need to stay ahead of her." The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with a mix of triumph and unease. Word of the vote and the financial records had spread like wildfire. People stopped me on my way to the mailbox, asking questions, offering thanks, or just venting years of pent-up frustration. But beneath the surface, I sensed a fracture forming. Not everyone was on board with dismantling the HOA entirely. Some, like Victor Pena's clique, had thrived under Margaret's rain-dodging fines while the rest of us paid through the nose. They weren't happy about losing their cushy setup. I was in the garage, sorting through more HOA files I'd printed, when Mike Torres rolled up in his beat-up pickup. He climbed out, wiping grease-stained hands on his jeans. "Got a problem, Ethan," he said, his tone grim. "What now?" I asked, setting down a stack of papers. "Victor's stirring shit. He's been going door to door, telling people you're trying to tank property values by killing the HOA. Says we need a structured system to keep things from falling apart." I snorted. "Structured system, my ass. He just wants his gravy train back." "Yeah, well, he's got a few takers. Linda Hayes is with him, and they're pushing for a new election to reinstate a board. Guess who they want in charge?" "Margaret," I said, the name tasting like bile. "Bingo. They're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow night at Victor's place. In VY Tation only." I clenched my jaw. Of course she wouldn't go quietly. She'd lost the vote, but she still had her loyalists sand enough dirt on the neighborhood to twist the narrative. "We need to crash that party," I said. "Show them the EVY Denke again. They can't argue with numbers." Mike nodded. "I'll round up some folks, Ellen, Bill Carter, maybe Angela Ruiz. We'll be ready." "Good," I said. "And I'm digging deeper. If she's planning a comeback, I want more ammo." That afternoon, I dove back into the financials, fueled by coffee and spite. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. The Dulaw $50,000 to Voss Consulting was just the tip of the iceberg. I found a Dulaw $75,000 emergency repair fund that vanished in a thin air, no receipts, no work orders. Then there was the loan Mike had mentioned, a Dulaw $150,000 line of credit taken out in 2021, supposedly for storm drainage upgrades. The drainage ditches were still clogged with weeds, and the interest had ballooned to Dulaw $20,000. Worse, the lender's name caught my eye: Pinnacle Bank. A quick search linked it to Daniel Voss's business network. Margaret hadn't just been skimming. She'd built a whole damn empire on our backs. But the real bombshell came buried in a folder of old meeting minutes. A single line, dated 2 years ago, approved transfer of Lot 17 to Pinnacle Property Solutions for Dulaw 1, pending redevelopment. Lot 17 was a vacant parcel at the edge of Pinewood Estates prime land that could have been a park or sold for a hefty sum. Instead, Margaret had handed it to her brother for $1. I cross-checked property records online and confirmed it. Daniel Voss now owned it, and he'd flipped it 6 months later for due law 120,000. The HOA or HOA had been robbed blind, and we'd never even known. I printed everything, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and triumph. This wasn't just fraud, it was a conspiracy. If I could get this to the right people, Margaret wouldn't just lose her grip, she'd face jail time. The next evening, Mike, Ellen, Angela, and I piled in my SUV and headed to Victor's McMansion at the end of Oak Ridge Lane. His house was a gaudy monstrosity, 3 stories of beige stucco and fake columns, a monument to his real estate hustle. Cars lined the driveway, and through the windows, I saw a dozen familiar faces. Linda Hayes, Tom Ridley, a few others who'd always kissed Margaret's ring. The air smelled of expensive cologne and desperation. We didn't knock. Mike pushed the door open, and we marched in, a stack of documents in my hands. The room fell silent, all eyes on us. Victor stood by the fireplace, mid-sentence, his slick smile faltering. Margaret was there too, perched on a leather sofa, her gray bun as tight as ever. She didn't flinch, but her eyes locked onto mine with a predator's focus. "This is a private meeting," Victor snapped, stepping forward. "You weren't in VY Ted." "Funny," I said, holding up the papers. "You didn't in VYTE us when you sold Lot 17 to Daniel Voss for $1 either. Or when you took out a due, law 150,000 loan we're still paying off. Should I keep going?" A murmur rippled through the room. Victor's face reddened. "That's nonsense. Everything was above board." "Then explain this," I said, tossing copies onto the coffee table. "Payments to Voss Consulting, a fake loan, a land grab that netted your buddy due law 120,000 while we got nothing. It's all here." Margaret stood, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You're out of your depth, Ethan. These are baseless accusations from a disgruntled troublemaker. The HOA acted in the community's best interest." "Best interest?" Angela shot back, her voice steady. "You find my mom due law 200 for a cracked flower pot while your brother pocketed our dues. That's your best interest?" The room erupted. Victor shouted over the noise, trying to regain control, but the loyalists were wavering. Ellen handed out more copies, and people started reading. Linda Hayes clutched the papers, her lips trembling. "Margaret, is this true?" she asked. "It's a misunderstanding," Margaret said, but her tone was brittle. "We'll address it at the next official meeting." "There won't be a next meeting," Mike interrupted. "You're done. The vote was legal, and we've got enough signatures to dissolve the HOA entirely. You're not clawing your way back." Margaret's mask slipped, just for a second. Fear flashed in her eyes before she straightened, smoothing her blazer. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low. "All of you." She swept out, Victor trailing behind her like a scolded dog. The room buzzed with debate, but the tide had turned. Her loyalists were cracking, and we had the proof to finish her. The next few days were a whirlwind. With the attorney, Mike had brought in James Callahan, a wiry guy with a shark's grin. We filed a formal lawsuit against Margaret, Victor, and the old board. Fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, the charges piled up like bricks in a wall. Callahan dug into the loan and Lot 17, uncovering a paper trail that led straight to Margaret's personal accounts. She'd funneled at least due law 300,000 over 5 years, disguising it as consulting fees and emergency funds. Meanwhile, the neighborhood rallied. Angela organized a town hall at the clubhouse, now stripped of its HOA stench and repainted by volunteers. Nearly every resident showed up, lawn chairs in tow, to vote on dissol VY-ing the HOA. It passed 87 fan-tram to 13 fan-tram, with Victor's faction sulking in the back. We formed a voluntary co-op instead. No dues, no fines, just neighbors pitching in for what mattered. Bill Carter, Ellen's husband, offered to oversee street repairs at cost. A group of teens volunteered to mow the greenbelt. The clubhouse became a free space for barbecues and birthdays, no permission slips required. But Margaret wasn't done fighting. A week after the town hall, I got a call from Jake at the utilities department. "Heads up," he said. "Someone's trying to reverse the power suspension on the HOA office. Claimed it was a clerical error." "Let me guess," I said. Margaret. Her name's on the appeal. Thought you'd want to know. I thanked him and called Callahan. He filed an injunction that same day, locking the office down until the lawsuit was settled. Margaret's counterattacks were desperate, now-legal filings full of bluster, none of it sticking. The audit, ordered by the court, was her death knell. It uncovered $400,000 in misappropriated funds, plus EVY Denke. She'd rigged appraisals to help Victor buy homes cheap. Her brother Daniel turned state's EVY Denke to save his own skin, spilling details of their scheme in exchange for leniency. The legal hammer fell fast. Margaret's assets were frozen bank accounts, her overpriced SUV, even her house. Criminal charges followed: fraud, theft, conspiracy. She was arrested on a muggy Thursday morning, her gray bun askew as deputies led her out in handcuffs. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, as neighbors gathered to gawk. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of VY Tory, but the relief was palpable. The lawsuit wrapped up 6 months later. We recovered $250,000 of the stolen funds, enough to pay off the loan and fix the drainage ditches for real. Margaret's house went to auction, snapped up by the same nonprofit I'd tipped off. A single MoMA nurse named Carla moved in with her 2 boys, their laughter filling a space once choked by greed. Pinewood Estates transformed. Without the HOA shadow, people took pride in their homes again, not out of fear, but choice. Sarah planted wildflowers in our yard, banned under Margaret's rules. Mike rebuilt his truck in his driveway, no fines in sight. The clubhouse hosted a 4th of July cookout, the air thick with barbecue smoke and freedom. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch with Sarah, Mia, chasing fireflies in the yard. The floodlights I'd installed glowed warm and defiant. Think she's gone for good? Sarah asked. I nodded. She's facing 10 years minimum. Her empire's dust. Good, she said, squeezing my hand. We did this together. Not just us, I said, looking out at the neighborhood alive, messy hours. All of us. And as the stars blinked on, I knew we'd won more than a fight. We'd reclaimed our home, our community, our lives. Margaret Voss had ruled through fear, but she'd underestimated the power of people who'd had enough. In the end, that was her fatal mistake and our greatest strength. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this VY Deo with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next VY Deo.